welcome back to another episode of Both Sides Now with your hosts Alex Martin and Eve McCullum. We break down politics with the aim of breaking down political polarisation and get you engaged in the issues that matter. This week has been a non-sitting week in Parliament, but there's still been lots of action as we gear up towards election, with policies announced, points to be proven, and celebrations for our Māori New Year. So, Eve, before I ask how things are with you, just I guess a special moment for one of my favourite times and celebrations of the year. Mana Watia a Matariki. Now's the time to remember those who have passed, reflect on the past year, celebrate the present, and look to the stars and plan for the year ahead. I do have a short little whakatauki that I'd like to share in the spirit of Matariki, which is Kua tau ngā purupura a Matariki ki te whenua, kua hui hui ngā iwi I te pūmahana o te kotahitanga me te aroha. The frost and snow of Matariki is upon the land, and the people have converged in unity and love, which I just think really sums it up pretty perfectly. It's a really nice one. So,
Yeah,
Eve, how are you?
Thanks for that, Alex.
A pleasure. Eve, how are you going? How are you spending your Matariki weekend?
Unfortunately, my Matariki weekend, if you're watching, you're able to see behind me, I am in Christchurch still. We have closing arguments on Monday in my trial that I'm working on. So, unfortunately, my Matariki has been spent inside and working. But that's okay. The end is in sight. Thank goodness. But the weather is beautiful in Christchurch, and I have managed to get out and enjoy some sunshine periodically, which has been nice. How are you, Alex? How are you spending the weekend?
That's so good. It's also a beautiful weekend up here in Tāmaki Makaurau. I wanted to get to the Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei celebration on Friday morning, the Hautapu, which I think was the national one too. I think all of the a lot of MPs and the Prime Minister was there, but I favoured my sleep and rest and recovery first. I think I had to listen to my body and say, no, I think I might need a couple more hours sleep. So I guess we're looking, my partner and I, looking to go for a walk out in the taiao in the environment, and maybe do our own sort of little hautapu in our household where we feed the stars, cook some kai from the earth, the river, sea, the sky, and let the steam rise as an offering to Matariki. So a few little plans, bits and bobs, but yeah, very grateful for this nice time to take a pause and reflect and soak up the long weekend.
Yeah, a long weekend. I feel like now that I've been working for a few years, appreciate them so much. 3 days feels like a lifetime compared to 2 days.
I mean, I've always been a little bit of an advocate for a 4-day work week, and I'm a bit jealous of those, like businesses and orgs that are kind of like trialing 4-day work weeks, because definitely when you get them with long weekends, oh my God, they are so good.
Yeah, no, it is amazing. But I'm glad to hear that you are able to go out and enjoy Matariki and celebrate it appropriately. I am quite upset that I'm not able to do anything. But unfortunately, work is calling. But yeah, looking forward to the end of this on Monday.
Godspeed, Eve. You got this. Final stretch. We'll celebrate with Matariki with you in mind.
Thank you.
Okay, so this week, as per, lots to discuss. For me, it was kind of hard to nail it down to just 3 topics for the week. But our agenda today, we want to talk to the solar power policies announced over the past fortnight from our 2 legacy parties, Labour and National. We're going to talk a little bit about the news circulating around the social media ban, and as well speak to New Zealand's first announcement that it'll be campaigning on restricting New Zealand residents from voting. And of course, we'll finish up with our social media moment of the week. Cracking into the solar power policies, we've saw the National Party announce its solar power policy, I think around the 26th of June, a couple of weeks ago. And then this week, we've seen the Labour Party also announce its solar saver policy. And I think, if I can just say, how refreshing and wonderful is it to see these 2 legacy parties, our big parties, campaign on solar power. It means that, I guess, whatever really happens on November 7th this year, there's going to be some relief, some sort of action for a lot of Kiwis, a lot of households to start accessing solar power as a form of their own generation of power. Because, oh my God, Eve, I feel like those power bills are really hitting this year.
Yeah, I'm not sure like if our household's doing anything different. It doesn't feel like we are, but this year's power bill seems to be noticeably higher than last year. And
Mm,
even before we hit winter as well, like the power bills in April and May, I was like, is there something going on? But it's just power's getting really, really expensive. And it's really pleasing to see that both the big political parties recognise this. And are trying to help provide New Zealanders with a different option, and also an option that I guess gives us a bit more control. We're not so
mm.
reliant on overseas sources for energy. And I think it's a little bit, in juxtaposition to the LNG terminal, which they've been trying to get going. I think solar panels, is a far better area, and it'll hopefully once they get them installed, will make a noticeable difference and keep the cost down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, sort of like speaking to the policies, we'll get to the sort of major parts of it. But I wanted to talk to the plug in solar sort of aspect of it, which for non homeowners like you and myself, I think this could really make a really great difference where we can go to Bunnings or Mitre 10 to placemakers, wherever. Personally, I'm a big fan of Bunnings, but that's an aside.
Get a
Um,
Bunnings snag while you're there.
yeah, absolutely. Support the community. Go grab a plug-in solar panel for a couple $100, which of course, like that's a still a big upfront cost. But I think it's all about thinking about the long term and how you being able to create savings in the long term is going to make a real big difference, because we can just grab a little power source and suddenly, charging on the go, or powering any little bits and pieces is just going to become a lot easier and a lot cheaper for a lot of Kiwis.
And to be fair, even like I'm not actually sure what the price of the plug-in solar is, but like my power bill personally at the moment, I think in my flat there are five of us, and I think we're each paying about like $80 to $90 a month at the moment for our power bill. So I think between us, like it would pay at our flat, for example, it would pay itself back so quickly if we were able to have that plug-in solar as an option.
Yeah, so it's really exciting that Labor has announced it will support plug-in solar. Um, that's part of their policy that they've announced. But then I think Simeon Brown also said for the National Party that they are working sort of behind the scenes at the moment on establishing their own plug-in solar standards and stuff. So while that hasn't been announced by National, it definitely does sound that both parties are like-minded in their thinking, and that for non-homeowners, there's reprieve there for us too.
Yeah, and I also think what I like about the policy, just like at a high level, is it's nice to see our political parties doing something that's positive as well. Because I think, sometimes politics, we're all kind of can feel a bit jaded by it because it's just like negative and they're going to repeal this and repeal that and it's just sort of toing and froing. But it's lovely to see something that's positive and will make quite an immediate effect and changes in people's life when it's implemented. And it's something that we can kind of all get behind. And both political parties have said, yeah, we acknowledge this as an issue and we want to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually do have a question for you, Eve, on that. The Green Party, for example, have come out and said, "Hey, look, there's cross-party support for this. Why are we making it into an election thing? Why do we have to do that when we could just get on with it now?" And clearly, there's support across the House. They've got the votes. They can establish the things that they want to do. Why do you think we have to wait for the election for this to happen?
Yeah, I did see those comments. I think probably at a high level, I think the Greens have got a point, but I suspect, and I'm just speculating here, but I do suspect there are probably a couple of reasons. One, political parties need to have some things to promise going into the election, and I think these are quite good promises. Although it's kind of, in a way, it sort of like neutralizes it, right? Because you're going to get it with either one. But also, two, probably practically, I suspect there's not time to make the changes here
Mm.
that need to be made to any legislation. I'm not actually across the details of what changes would need to be made. But I suspect there's probably just not time. The government's got a really busy agenda of things to get passed before we get to November 7. And remembering that the House rises a couple of months before Election Day anyway. So I suspect there's just not time. But I mean, hey, yeah, it would be amazing if I could get it going now. But I also think in the time it would take to get stuff going, it's not going to make a difference for power prices this winter. It wouldn't be until next winter that we saw the effects anyway. So I suspect that's why it's just, a timing issue as much as anything.
Yeah, I think you're probably right on with that one. I do agree with the Green Party a bit, like, come on, guys, let's just get on with it. But I also think it is a good opportunity as well to have that exchange of ideas because there are some differences between the two policies. They are similar, but there are some differences. And I think being able to, enabling the conversation for Kiwis to kind of consider the two policies and see what might work better is also really constructive as well. I guess kind of like getting into the policies themselves, right? If we're going to talk about the differences and the similarities. So National said a couple of weeks ago that it'll introduce its home energy fund, and this will offer low interest, long term loans repaid through rates. And this will enable households to invest in solar, batteries, insulation, and other bits and pieces without the upfront costs. And I think that's the real part of it, without the upfront cost. The way that they're financing this is through a narrow version of the Ratepayer Assistance Scheme. And this is, I think, quite an unknown sort of national financing platform jointly owned between central government and some participating councils. And there's some really awesome advocacy work, I think, from Rewiring Aotearoa when it comes to the sort of lobbying side of things to say, hey, we've got this system, this ratepayers assistance scheme, let's use it. Let's actually see what we can do with it. And the other part of National's policy was to remove, or is to remove, planning rules that make it quite difficult for Kiwis to generate their own power and get on top of solar. Because at the moment, if you want to install solar panels on your roof, you are going to need to apply to the council for a resource consent. And that can be a bit of a lengthy and costly process. So they're removing that. No more resource consent for rooftop solar, and a few other bits and pieces with the Resource Management Act, which we know is also under huge review at the moment. That's something they do want to get done before this election. And that is to put ground-mounted solar on farms as a permitted activity, add small-scale battery storage as of right, and run small micro hydro for on-site use. So yeah, very interesting proposals from National there. Eve, what do you reckon?
Oh, I think it's fantastic. I think it's very much focused on one, like removing those upfront costs, because that's what has been the argument with solar, is that it's been a massive upfront cost and it's just not realistic for most people to afford. So I think that's really trying to help lower and middle income New Zealand. And I think the plug-in solar, if they can add that to that policy, will really help with that as well. And I also think the removing the regulations and requirements is also important because, again, it's another barrier. If you've got a cost, got this big cost having to go through the council, and councils are slow and just difficult to deal with at times. So I think, yeah, all in all, it's a really positive policy, and it's really acknowledging that there is an issue in this area, and our energy security is a problem. And I think that's partially been triggered by what we've seen going on in the Middle East with the Iran war and Strait of Hormuz closing and petrol prices getting really expensive and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, 100%. And I know there's still some murmurings going on with the Strait of Hormuz, Iran and the United States. It's not quite over, but I don't think anybody thought it was over at all. So
No.
we'll continue to play by the whims of Donald Trump. But moving to Labour, Labour's policy, pretty similar. It's also going to offer long-term, low-interest loans. But one thing that sort of distinguishes them from the national policy is that the way in which they're going to have these loans go through can be done in two ways. So either through the ratepayer assistance scheme, like National, which means you can pay back through your rates, or through a loan with your local lines company. So for us in Auckland, that's Vector. For my whānau in Dunedin, that's Aurora. Depends where you are across the motu. So I think that gives a little bit more flexibility, I guess. And then they're also offering a kickstart subsidy of up to $3,000 for low and middle income homeowners and renters. And then they're also offering a $30 million community battery fund. And so this kind of means that neighborhoods will be able to share the benefits. Bob doesn't have solar panels on his place, but down the road there's a generation, there's a source, so everybody gets to reap the benefits. Their policy is going to cost about $160 million over 4 years, and they'll fund this by repurposing the government's Gas Security of Supply Fund. That's actually something I don't really know much about, that fund.
Yeah, no, I'm not across the details of that fund either. But I guess what I would say, and probably, I guess probably you can see in the two different policies, you can still see the difference in, I guess, the left and the right in those two policies. So I guess, how do I explain this? I guess one way to look at the left and the right is the level, well, a big part of it is the level of government intervention. And so I think, the Nationals policy is very much just setting the scene, and making it easier for things to happen, but they're not necessarily giving out as much money, because the right spend less, and we've seen that a lot with this government this term. They've been cutting back on spending. The left are essentially enabling the same thing to happen, but they've got that extra step further, and they're giving people grants to be able to do it. And that's just the difference in the left and the right, really, in New Zealand.
Yeah, and I think it is encouraging, like from my point of view, I think it's encouraging for lower and middle income earners, because that cost will be a huge deterrent. And for some people, like, it is still a loan, like you need to repay these loans, and repaying them might be difficult for or more difficult for lower and middle income earners than it would be for your folk, and who are earning a higher income. So yeah, it I think is quite cool to see different approaches, different sets of ideas, and hopefully there will be some really interesting and constructive debate about these solar power policies over the next few months as we head into the election.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, it's winter now. People are going to be hitting with big power bills. And ultimately, a big thing that people vote on is their financial circumstances. And if you've got a massive power bill, you're not going to be particularly happy with how things are going. So I think these are really smart policies from both the big parties. And hopefully it'll, cascade into more discussion around energy. So as we start to look at, again, do things around potentially electric cars, and how else can we electrify New Zealand and be less reliant on overseas sources of energy.
Yeah, 100%. And it is, you're so right. Like, it is really timely. I think the cost of power bills will be fresh in voters' minds in November. So it'll definitely be something to sort of stew on over the next few months.
Shall we move on?
Let's move on. We also want to speak to the social media ban at the moment for kids. As we look to our neighbours across the Tasman implementing their own social media ban, and it's been in place for a few months now, we judge them over whether it's working out or not. But New Zealand is actively considering a social media ban of its own. So the National Party wants to implement a social media ban for under 16s, and this is to protect our young, vulnerable people from bullying, inappropriate content, and social media addiction. They first had a members' bill by MP Catherine Wedd, but that's been put on hold while the Education Minister, Erica Stanford, takes a wider look around online safety. Still, National wants to implement some legislation before the election, but there's a bit of a big problem standing in their way. The coalition partners don't agree with the legislation they're wanting to pass, and for different reasons. So now National's looking across the aisle to Labour and saying, "Hey guys, please help us." Eve, I think we're a bit more uniquely placed to chat about social media, because social media really started taking off with like Facebook and Snapchat and Twitter when we were in school. Um, I guess around intermediate age, things started really taking off, and then at high school, it was everything. It was all around us. So I'd like to ask, what was your social media experience when you were at school?
Yeah, that's a good question. I broadly thought social media was fine when I was at school. I had those mean, nasty parents that wouldn't let me have Facebook till I was 13 because that was the age that Facebook said. So I think part
Yeah.
of my 13th birthday, I literally got a Facebook account that day. What other social media did I use? Yeah, Instagram. Snapchat was quite a big thing when we were at school. There are some hideous Snapchat photos of me when I was like 14 or 15 that friends, like, you know how you send silly faces? There are lots of those that I'm sure one day will, they crop up periodically on birthdays and stuff. But yeah, beyond that, I only really guess use those sort of platforms. But what I do think is interesting, and they're not as big of a thing now, but I had friends who used to use, this might be a bit of a throwback, but Omegle and Kick, to talk,
Oh my
basically
God,
talk to random
I
strangers online.
I'm gagged. I totally forgot about Omegle.
Yeah, and I had friends who like made friends with these people who were like over in America, and I
Yeah.
think one of them might have even gone and met one of them or something, like very random. A lot of it was just a bit of a joke, and we used to sort of think it was funny, and you'd say like slightly inappropriate things to these people, when you're bored in your lunch break on Omegle. But I mean, I guess thinking back on it, like it was kind of crazy that, at 14, 15 we could do these. But I do, yeah, on the whole, I didn't really have any massive issues with social media. But I think though I would put that in the context of the algorithms weren't really getting going when we were at
Mm.
school. I think that it was still a little bit more pure, if you can describe it
Mm.
like that. Like it was a bit more sort of what you see is what you get. Yeah, how about you? What was your experience?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it has changed a lot in the last 10 or 15 years. Yeah, I remember getting a Facebook definitely earlier than you were allowed to. And that's because my friends had one and then their friends had one. And so the story goes, you know? And so I guess that was probably when I was younger, below the age of 13. But I do remember as well, I do remember some harm from social media when I was at high school. Like, I remember anonymous sites like Ask FM where anybody could send you,
Yes,
and
I forgot about
right?
Ask FM.
Yeah, people could send you anonymous questions or comments, and, like, I remember one time being sent a message to be told to go drink bleach or something, like, it was horrific, and I remember bullying over social media sites, either, like, publicly or privately, and then another form of harm I can sort of reflect on is, like, seeing photos and videos of people, mainly women, who have unhealthy eating habits and eating disorders, and then thinking at the ripe age of like 14 years old that I was wholly inadequate because I didn't have a thigh gap or something, you know? And I
Oh my
think,
god, the thigh gap trend.
right? Such a huge thing. And like
Yeah.
those sorts of things were so, like, really, really influential at a time of our lives that are really kind of like moving, like, lots of stuff is going
Yeah,
on.
it's a hard
It's
stage
really
in your life. It's
impacting
very
you.
formative.
Very formative. That's the word I'm after. Yeah, yeah. So I guess with that in mind, where do you stand on a social media ban?
Yeah, so with all that in mind, and I will canvas and I completely acknowledge there's actually quite a lot of harm that does come from social media, but I don't think banning's the solution. And there are a couple of reasons why I broadly am not that supportive of this legislation. I tend to think banning things doesn't actually work. Like, and this is an extreme example, but drugs are illegal in New Zealand, and you think of how many people can still access drugs pretty easily. Um, and I think that and it's just it's easy to say, but education is a better response. But at the end of the day, young people are going to, whether it be age be 16 or 14 or 18, whatever the ban ends up being. I think it's gonna probably get to 16, but they're going to end up on it after anyway. And so,
Mm.
yes, you're a little bit more mature to be able to deal with it, but still, if you've never actually encountered it before, how will you have any understanding? And I liken it a little bit to alcohol. Like, obviously, the legal age to you can buy drinks in New Zealand is 18, but you can have drinks with permission of your parents when you're a little bit younger. And this might be controversial, but I grew up in like, when I was like, maybe 13, 14, 15, like periodically was allowed to have a sip of wine or, and I guess alcohol was normal in my
Mm.
household and not to binge drink at all. Like mum and dad were never binge drinkers or alcoholics. So we'll couch that. But it was very much like when I turned 18, I didn't feel the need to go and be like, oh my God, I can suddenly go and buy a whole,
Yeah.
a whole box of 10 drinks and then I'm going to get really smashed, and get in
Mm.
myself into
Mm.
trouble because I'd grown up being a little bit exposed to it. And it's like, oh, it's like not that amazing. So I think I liken social media a little bit to that. Like, I think it's important that, understanding it and being brought up with education and exposure to it's important. And the other thing I think as well, I'm just really skeptical, but like, young people are clever. They will get around this ban. There will be new websites that'll crop up all the time. Like, I think the Australian one bans most of them, but correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it bans YouTube potentially, but there'll be new sites that'll come up. Like you said, you think about like all the random ones that were around when we were kids, like things will continue to crop up, and I just think this isn't going to solve it, and potentially going to go to worse places, because at least Facebook, Instagram, etc., we know about, and they are kind of being required to regulate. And I think that the approach should be more on the social media companies, and we should regulate them harder and enforce them more, rather than just try and take people off it, because they're going to end up in worse places of the internet. So yeah, I just don't really think it's going to work, but I'm fascinated to watch Australia and do stand to be corrected. What are your thoughts?
Wow, Eve, we might have complete alignment here. This is crazy. Um, you've honestly hit all the points so far that I've kind of come up with. One thing I might add on to that is like the age verification aspect of it, because that has some really big privacy concerns attached to it. And not just for kids, right? Like for everybody. To determine whether a child is trying to access social media, you first need to rule out that it's not an adult. So I think age verification, there are some issues about that. But I think what you've hit the nail on the head with is this kind of relationship and this perspective, the relationship between addiction and social media. And I think the viewpoint that this can be seen as a health issue. I think what we ought to be quite considerate of is that this could drive young people into more fringe, unknown, dark areas of the internet. And like all things like alcohol and tobacco and drugs that are addictive and cause a lot of social harm, banning them outright means that people will turn to places like the dark net, or like to gangs or to other underground institutions to source them. And when it's out of sight, that is really concerning. And you're also bang on with that these kids are clever. We like my school as well had like a social media sort of ban on the school Wi-Fi, so we couldn't access Facebook and Snapchat and things like that. And then suddenly all of these kids were like, virtual private networks, VPN, boom, download a
Yeah,
VPN, get around the whole thing. And so maybe we'll
yeah.
speak to VPNs in a second, but like we can't be underestimating these kids. They will find ways to get around it. And so while we are thinking about these sort of solutions to this problem with kids in mind, I don't think necessarily targeting kids and restricting kids is going to be the solution, the silver bullet. And I don't think there is one, but definitely going after the big tech companies and the algorithm makers is one area we need to really address.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to touch on as well, and I guess I can speak to this being from a small community, is that there are people as well who find their people online and find communities. Like,
Mm,
I grew up in a small rural community, and I think that it can be, if you are, potentially part of the LGBTQ community, or you're part of an ethnic group, we haven't got a lot of people from your ethnicity that live in the area. It can be quite isolating. I
yes.
personally can't relate to that, but I can understand, that that's things that people, from those minorities may struggle with. They're in these isolated communities. If you live in Auckland, you can find your people wherever. But, if you live in an isolated community, it's a lot harder to, and there has been that ability for young people to find like-minded people online. And so I just think that that's something as well to keep in mind too. There are other groups of society who may use it positively. And I'm not saying there aren't lots of issues with social media, because there are, but I think there are lots of considerations for this bill too.
100%. I mean, like, I think I spoke to you a few weeks ago about how I really found my community obsessing over One Direction on Twitter with a whole bunch of people. And I know that's not quite a minority, but that's my experience. Like,
Yeah,
I did find a great sense of community with a whole bunch of other young girls on social media, which doesn't sound great, but it was great. Like it was a really wonderful time to be like, hey, we all enjoyed this one thing, and let's all get to be friends about it. It was fun.
yeah. No, so I'm going to be curious to see how this goes. I'm not surprised ACT aren't supporting it, because, ACT do very much personal choice, make your own choices, etc. I Part of me reckons Labor might support it because at the end of the day, I do think this policy will be popular with parents. We don't have kids, so I guess we're speaking to this from people who've been through a social media generation.
Yeah.
But I can imagine it's quite popular with parents who are really worried about social media for their kids. And I suspect Labor won't want to lose the hearts and minds of parents. So I wouldn't be surprised if Labor did support National and help get this across the line.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what that Parliament has been looking at this. Last year, there was a parliamentary inquiry into online harm and young people. And so some of the suggestions, and this is across all of the parties in Parliament. I actually think Eve, your dad might have been on this committee,
Yes, I think he is
having
on
a
the
look at
committee. He
this.
is.
But some of the solutions that they came out with was having a national online safety regulator, having tighter controls on digital design elements such as algorithmic recommendations and infinite scrolling, curbing harmful online advertising, educating parents and children about ways to reduce online risks, and forcing tech companies to be more transparent. Those are some of the recommendations that they've put out. What do you reckon about those?
I like all of those because they're couched in a much more sort of educational realm and also a realm of let's put the pressure back on the big companies to deal with this. Yeah, I'm much more of a fan of those approaches to dealing with this issue.
Yeah, me too. And I think like when it comes to like regulating the big tech companies, this is often framed as something really, really difficult. And I think it is because the beauty of the internet is that it's big, it's bold, it's wide, it's accessible, it's free, and we shouldn't prevent that. But the internet crosses our sort of ordinary jurisdictions, meaning our laws can't always reach them. So, this is a global problem, not just a New Zealand problem, and it's probably going to require a global solution. Um, so, I think that's probably where some work needs to be done with, these global institutions coming together and addressing this issue. But in saying that, there are still some things that New Zealand can do. We are a small country, we don't have a lot of bargaining power. There aren't a lot of incentives for digital platforms to conform with the rules that we might impose on them. But steps like an e-safety commission and a commissioner like Australia has, like an independent digital regulator, I think that's a really good step. Yeah, definitely some more education and and looking into what is going on the internet, what are people sort of drawn to or maybe even addicted to, and treating it like a health issue as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I kind of think as well, this might be a bad argument, but the horse is kind of bolted a little bit as well. Like, so many young people have grown up in the digital age. They know all these social media sites exist. Like, yeah. I mean, I don't think the policy is going to work overnight anyway, but I do think it's going to be so hard. And they're going to I think they're going to get around it anyway. So I think having sort of all these other mechanisms in place to try and make what we have online as safe as possible is an approach I'm much more in favor of.
Yeah, I actually don't think the horses bolted argument is a bad one because I agree. Like oh, nobody could have really hugely foreseen what social media was going to turn into, say 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So the law is playing catch up with social media. I think we just need to act a little bit faster now and have some really good evidence based policy around this.
Yeah, 100%. And I do like that. I know that that's why they put this part of the reason they put the stop on Catherine Wedd's members bill was so that Erica Stamp can go and do some proper work on it. Because I do think it's a lot more complex than just a members bill. It needs proper government departments to go and look into it. And we're lucky that our neighbours across the Tasman are trying it. So I suspect there'll be quite a lot of New Zealanders looking over across the ditch to see what's going on.
Totally. I think the whole world is, lots of other countries as well,
Yeah.
having a look. Very quickly, last point on this one, I wanted to speak to VPNs. It was kind of circulating that the government was looking into banning virtual private networks. As I said to you before, like I used a VPN to get around the safety measures that my school had imposed. Sorry, Otago girls, love you. Um, Um, and so there was an article that came out saying that the government was going to press on with this, and then I think Erica Stanford came out and said, "Well, we're not going to press on with this. We've never sought or received advice on banning VPNs, even though it did kind of look like that had been the discussion." Now,
I also think that must have been a consideration. Like,
no,
surely they had to
this
discuss it.
this is my point, right? To me, it makes sense that this would form part of the discussion as to how we address social media harm. Like, I used it. Like, lots of kids use this. Lots of kids do this. Kids aren't dumb. Like, there needs to be some consideration as to how this is addressed, because kids will get around it. They're smart. Of course,
100%.
one option would be to ban them outright. And I would say that's a pretty stupid option. And I don't rate the ACT Party or many of their policies, but here's where I do agree with them. You can't be restricting everybody's ability to use a virtual private network so that the clever kids can't get around social media restrictions. Because you look
100%.
to the countries that do ban VPNs: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Belarus. And if you think about what kind of democracy or lack thereof they have, go, hmm.
Yeah, so I'm pleased that the government aren't going to be banning VPNs, but I mean, as I said, it must have been in the conversation and a consideration for what they were doing. But you could never do that. There are VPNs everywhere. It's very much part of our society, and as you said, the countries that have banned them aren't countries that we necessarily want to represent their social values for.
Yeah, 100%. Alrighty, okay, moving on to our final major topic of the week. We wanted to speak to New Zealand first. Now, I don't particularly want to speak to New Zealand first, but I kind of want to call out bullshit where I see it. So, New Zealand First has announced that it will be campaigning on removing the right for New Zealand residents to vote. Currently, any permanent resident in New Zealand who has been living here for at least 1 year continuously is able to register to vote. And I think that that's a really good thing. New Zealand First says, quote, "Voting in our country should be a privilege of those who have sworn allegiance to New Zealand and who have made the commitment to make New Zealand their home and their future." I want to be clear. Voting isn't a privilege. Voting is a right. Now, under the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act, it isn't a right for residents, but I think it's pretty bloody cool that we do have residents voting in New Zealand, and I think our democracy and our country is far better off for it. Eve, where are you on this one?
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of countries don't allow residents to vote. Like, some places you have to be a citizen. But I think New Zealand's unique because we are a country of many different, nationalities, and lots of people move here. And I think that we are, because we're so small, we are reliant on other countries and other people with different skills to come here, and I think particularly, at the moment, we've got a massive issue around declining birth rates. And one of the ways we potentially solve that is if you don't want to pay, women to have more children and keep New Zealanders is the migration, so that we can afford to have everything that we, like in this country. So I just think it's not very in New Zealand, the sort of policy that we have in New Zealand. And we are a very welcoming country traditionally, and there are so you walk down Auckland, there are people from all different nationalities. In our rural sector, they are propped up heavily by Filipino workers. The list goes on. I'm not a fan of this, and I think it will also open up conversations that are not very pleasant for New Zealand to have. And saying all that, I'm not surprised this is a policy that Winston Peters has come out with. It's quite clear he's signaled that this is going to be an immigration-heavy discussion at the election, and so it's not really surprising. It's very much within his wheelhouse. But yeah, and I can't imagine that a national league government would ever support that, and I'd be very disappointed if they did. But I suspect that it'll get pushed to one side in any coalition negotiations.
I do hope so. Yeah, just on that like comparison to countries thing, I think, comparing where New Zealand is at in relation to other countries is a totally fair thing to do. I do this too, like when we're looking at different policies, seeing what other countries are doing, like we do with the social media ban, right? Um, we
Yeah.
take inspiration. There's no need to always reinvent the wheel. We can apply what's working elsewhere. But there are lots of amazing things about having different, unique viewpoints and, having a world leading approach on something. Like, we are so immensely proud of the fact, as a country, that we are the first country to give women the vote, Like, how awesome is it to be world leading in something, especially democratic rights? So, New
100%.
Zealand. New Zealand does sit at the open end of that spectrum, and having a conversation about where we sit on this spectrum is valid. But I just think New Zealand First is not having a constructive conversation about this. Like with most of their bills and policies in and around Parliament, they frame this as the way that citizenship is important and must be protected. Oh my God, nobody's arguing that it isn't. Like, but why are you bringing residency into it? Like, how does residency and the ability for New Zealand residents to vote diminish citizenship in any way? Because I believe that if you disenfranchise people who are so thoroughly integrated into our society, we're talking people who live here, people who have connections here, have community here, who work here, have friends here, pay taxes here, have family here, cherish people here, are in the process of citizenship here, have lived and participated in democracy under this law for most of their lives here. I think if you disenfranchise these people, you diminish the vote itself. Like, to me, it kind of means that your vote and my vote means holds a little bit less meaning, because we're not actually then voting for a society where everybody gets a say. I I genuinely cannot think of a good reason as to why we should prevent people from voting, especially younger people, our demographic that tends to have a pretty, a poorer turnout in elections. Why should there be less of us? Like, a policy like this could impact a lot of our friends. So it's not worth it. And go away, Winston
And, well,
Peters.
and I think as well, if you consider a big part of the policy reason behind voting is because you pay tax. So you should have a right to say how your taxes are spent. And so if we, ban voting for residents, all these residents are paying taxes here. And now I know there are people here on work visas, etc., who also pay taxes, but it's pretty well acknowledged they're here for a shorter period of time. Probably not even, I don't even think some of them would be able to legally stay for the entire 3 years of an election cycle. People that are residents are here for a very extended period of time through multiple election cycles usually, and they're paying taxes just like you and I are as New Zealand citizens. So why should they not be able to have a say in how their taxpayer money is spent? And also at the end of the day, like, Australia is not a hard move. It's just across the ditch. They probably would earn more money. So, if New Zealand does disenfranchise these people, they will leave, and New Zealand will continue to struggle. In so many areas where in work that Kiwis just don't want to do.
100%. And I think the taxation, representation chat is a really important one. I think it is also important to note that tax and this right to vote, there's not one and the same, but it is a really good argument, I think, for why, we should broaden up enfranchising people and being able to vote. One other thing I want to speak to as well, like, in countries where immigrants can vote, or residents, right? People who want to be elected will go to those communities and talk to them about their issues and their values, their beliefs, what's going on in their lives, because they want their vote. And how is that a bad thing? Like, they're part of our community, and voting gives them a sense of belonging. I think we'll get a much less grievance politics infiltrating our system because they actually feel like their voices are heard,
Yeah, and it's a good point. Like, if you're worried about people coming here, potentially with extremist views, not allowing them to vote is a potential is a really good way to continue to push those extremist views if we're not going to even engage with them. But yeah, this is just a classic New Zealand first policy, and I hope it goes no further than the election, and that the media, just kind of ignore it.
Yeah, I will, I guess, shout out Andrea Vance for calling out Winston Peters. He then went kind of on a bit of a
Oh god, it
rage
was
on
vile.
Facebook. Like, oh my God, go away,
But
Winston.
then I saw a really good comment on the post that he wrote, and I think it was like to the words the effect of basically like, well, the fact that you're talking about it clearly means that she's relevant, and like I often think like if people are talking about you, good or bad, you've clearly like hit a nerve. You're clearly relevant. People clearly interested in that viewpoint. If someone's giving you a really vile attack back, like Winston Peters did on that social media post.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, we really do aim to discourage like harmful communications with, on social media, especially about politics. But the thing is that Winston Peters is setting the standard for himself. Like he started by like being on the attack and having a go at journalists and stuff like that. Hey, this isn't constructive.
Yeah, completely agree. But I guess to wrap up our discussion, something that is constructive and really positive that I've seen this week is our social media moment of the week. So I wanted to share, we'll put it in the show notes. It was a video that my local MP, Greg Fleming, who's the MP for Maungakiekie, posted on his social media on Friday. And it's a lovely video. He is standing in Cornwall Park with one of his sons, I believe, and they're having a conversation in Te Reo. Now, Greg is Pākehā, but he's made a huge effort to learn Te Reo, and he speaks it beautifully. And he and his son are discussing what Matariki means to them. His son also speaks Te Reo beautifully as well, and I think he's been in, recently is in a course learning more Te Reo, and he even corrects Greg on a couple of things that he says as well. And it's just a very sweet, wholesome conversation, and I think it shows a lovely approach to the Matariki holiday, but I think also as well to learning Te Reo. And I know that Greg does a lot of work in this space in the Māori Affairs Select Committee. But yeah, I just thought it was very wholesome to see, someone who isn't from a Te Reo, isn't Māori, but is still very much embracing this language and embracing this huge part of New Zealand culture.
Yeah, I really loved when you showed me this video, Eve, because I think it really encapsulates the sort of spirit of Matariki, being able to reflect and talk to your whānau and think about things a little bit deeper and stuff. And yeah, I'll reflect on the fact that I probably need to improve my te reo Māori. I think that would be something that I would maybe put my hopes and desires into Hiwai Te Rangi and maybe manifest for myself over the next year. Um, I don't want to be a party pooper, but I will kind of juxtapose that beautiful social media post from Greg Fleming with our Deputy Prime Minister's social media post for Matariki. David Seymour wrote on Facebook, "Happy Matariki to all who celebrate. Also, spare a thought for those working through and those paying time and a half plus a day in lieu to stay open today."
Oh my God, not the point. Not the point, David Seymour.
Oh my
Like,
God.
come on. And you could make the same argument. We have all these Christian holidays that mean I'm going to probably offend the people here, but we have Easter, right? That's a Christian holiday. New Zealand isn't massively religious anymore, but we still celebrate that. We celebrate the King's birthday. The King arguably doesn't necessarily have a huge amount to do with New Zealand anymore. But are we putting posts out about on these holidays? No.
Well,
Whereas, like, our Māori culture is a huge part of us.
100%. No, I can also say what David Seymour's King's birthday post was, which was earlier this year. Happy King's birthday. The Crown represents a fundamental promise that every New Zealander, regardless of background, enjoys the exact same rights and freedoms under the law. It's a unifying institution worth celebrating. Enjoy the long weekend.
Yeah, come on. I think New Zealand has way more connection to Matariki and our Māori history than we do to the King now. And I'm sorry if I've offended anyone with those comments, but and again,
we're a secular country mostly.
Yeah, we have different holidays to celebrate different things, and I just think that that's the wrong attitude.
So that is all to say, Greg Fleming, ka pai on a wonderful social media post. Our Deputy Prime Minister could definitely learn from you, and it's awesome to see Te Reo Māori flourishing as is the purpose, right, of these wonderful celebrations and these connections to Te Ao Māori. So yeah, well done, Greg.
And on that note, a nice positive note to end it on for a change, we will wrap it up here. Thank you so much for watching and listening this week, and we will see you back next week. Enjoy Matariki weekend.